Sometimes restoring old hardware is a heavy burden. In this case, it's the heaviest package I received so far. What lies in it might be the only computer that survives an atomic blast. Let me introduce you to the Robotron 1715.
After the end of World War II, the world was split into two, East and West. This marked the beginning of the era called the Cold War.
If you never heard of Robotron, I do not blame you. Robotron, founded in 1969 in East Germany, started out to sell office equipment and electronics in the early days, but grown more and more successful in the late 70s and 80s, producing a variety of computers for East Germany and the Soviet Union. Now, why is that computer the only one that might survive an atomic blast? Well, for starters, this one is made out of solid metal. Not only the monitor and the keyboard is made out of solid steel, even all of the interior and exterior parts except the keypads and drive slots are made out of solid band metal. Of course, this comes with a price, a whopping 12.8 kg in weight for the whole system. The keyboard certainly seen better days, as well as the rest of the machine. So join me, and let's have a look together what awaits us inside this old relic of the Soviet Union. A first glance at the connectors reveals that they had certainly seen better days. Pins are broken and plastic has been ripped out. As it seems that this computer might survive an atomic blast, it never survives children. In this case, I mean you, Jacqueline. A look at the back reveals a connector for a floppy disk, a display, a V24 serial-like connection, and a printer port. The machine number, in this case 66004, reveals that this was in mid to late production, as 93,000 units have been produced after all. At the left side there's the standard power connector, two fuses and the monitor power connection. It delivers 12 volt. The Robotron is powered by a U880 Zilog Z80 clone CPU at 2.5 MHz. Later models were upgraded to a 4 MHz version. Even though this machine has 64 kilobytes of RAM, it can only display text and ASCII characters. On closer inspection, it seems that some of the keyboard pins has been broken off. That sure is something I need to fix later on. A first glance into the desktop computer reveals the usually dust and grime. At this point I have no idea if the disk drives are still working, but I have to clean them anyway. A lot of people don't realize that you can quickly destroy old hardware just by switching it on. The amount of dust and grime that has been collected over the last 35 years would have killed something in this computer for sure. And if it's not the dust and grime that makes a shortage, it usually is an old power supply that has gone bad. So before you get any new old hardware, please open it up and check if the power supply is still working. As you can see, there's a lot of dust and grime covered over the mainboard. That is easily cleanable. What is more interesting that this mainboard has several ground connections to the tower itself. I don't know why they did that, but there must have been a good reason for that. But I never seen that before in any computer I opened so far. The daughterboard that I have disconnected only controls the floppy drives, but it was possible to expand this machine with different kind of daughterboards. In later versions you can expand this with a graphics board as well. The mainboard itself looks rather okay. It has some factory fixes, as well the capacitors seem to be in good shape. The first things to remove are the small paper labels in order to know later on which chip has what purpose. Although later on I found the developer's manual and it is so detailed you basically can rebuild this computer based on this manual from scratch if you like to. Now we're getting to the interesting part. Usually I'm keeping my distance from power supplies, but this power supply hasn't been powered up since the late 80s, so I'm sure I can't get any shocks or something. Although I have to admit the size of this power supply is rather surprising. Looking inside of it, and it turns out there is more air than power supply after all. Considering the amount of rust in that power supply, I'm amazed if it's still working. But we will have a good look at that. So far the capacitors look fine, no damage at all. A lot of dust and rust, but that can be managed. A little surprising to me was that this power supply has its own little circuit inside. This circuit actually regulates the voltages for the boot up process. The 12 volt has to be present a bit later than the 5 volts, otherwise the machine won't turn on. Considering that this computer is made in the Soviet Union, It surprised me that there is a Pabst fan inside. A 4658N, which is still sold nowadays and made out of solid metal. It is powered with 230 volts and it is quite a large fan for this small machine. Of course, it's no surprise that something's gone bad inside this power supply. The fuse has been corroded because it was made out of a different metal than the fuse holders. So we have some nice oxidation around it. For sure the fuse and the placeholders needs to be replaced as soon as possible. Another thing that didn't survive the time was the on and off switch. I was warned already that those switches were already fragile in the early days when this machine was produced. But now it simply refused to switch on and off. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of oxidation in it anyway. So I will not bother restoring this switch, but simply buy a fitting new one, because all of the power runs through that anyway. As I was waiting for my replacement parts, I took the chance and cleaned up the main board. As you can see, we have quite some interesting ships on there. A lot of Russian ships, but as well as one Tesla ship. As you can see, the traces are still fine, the capacitors are okay and do not leak, and it seems this board might just work like it is. Of course, I need to replace the keyboard connector. Having a closer look at the daughter board for the floppy drive, it seems that maybe some connections got damaged, but since I measured them through, they're still working, so I hope everything is in order there. Those quite unusual floppy drive connectors were corroded badly. All the small pins have been turned grey or black, so it took me like an hour to scrape all of it off, and it seems they'll be fine now. Let's get to the exterior parts. This top part was yellowed and really dirty, so I had a base cleaning of it, but there are still some grime that needs to be removed. Gladly this is no plastic, so we don't have to deal with bromide yellowing like many other retro machines have that problem. This is pure metal that has been covered with some spray paint. As you can see, the connectors have some dents as well as the back plate. I will try to fix that, because it was quite a pain to get the top lid off, just because of those dents. While I was on it, I removed corrosion from most of the parts, like screws and other metals. From here on it's just cleaning work and removing rust. This is the most important part, but also mostly the time expensive part. I cleaned up the power supply with some special electric cleaning fluid that evaporates after a while. I still have no idea if this power supply is working anyway, but I want to make sure that everything is in good shape when I put it together. It looks much nicer now, but still there is some corrosion at the fuse clips, so I need to desolder them. Considering the amount of rust in that power supply, this computer must have been used for quite some time. Usually those computers were used for office or educational purposes in schools. After removing the rust, I covered everything with some special oil that prevents the rust from forming again. I was also able to acquire a fitting spare part for the power switch. This one feels much nicer and clicks really good, so I'm very confident this will work out as expected. As you can see, I also applied some special foam for preventing dust and hairs to get sucked into the power supply again. Let's have a look at the keyboard connector. As you can see, some of the pins has been bent and simply broken off. Gladly the people of the Robotron Electronics forum sent me some spare parts to replace that. Now this looks like good as new. All what's left to do is put everything back together and have a look if things work out as expected. Here I'm putting the numbers on the papers back where they belong to. I'm using a natural, removable, non-acid adhesive to accomplish that. Now it's time for testing. Since this is a switch-in power supply, it needs an electrical load attached to it. In this case, my old SCSI drive and a hard drive. As you can see, the 5V voltage seems to be perfect actually. I also checked the 12V voltage and I'm confident that this power supply will be working just fine. Putting everything back together is now much easier. The drives are clean and working as I tested them on my PC. But let me tell you about what happened when I tested this machine at the first time. The drives were working and I got a picture at the monitor, although I could not load any disk. So I was contacting people on the Robotron Electronics forum and it turns out that the floppy controller gone bad. After the floppy disk controller was repaired, I was expecting that this works just fine. But as you might know, old hardware is a bit fragile. Since this machine uses a CP/M compatible operating system called SCP, I expected it to load up just fine when I inserted the disk, although it doesn't happen. The reason for that simply was that my disk that was delivered with the computer gone bad. So I got another package from the Robotron Electronics forum with a working disk and it was time to boot it up for good. So here's the final test. As you can see, nothing happens. Now, from here, things get a little bit disappointing. To recapitulate that odyssey, that happened now is that the monitor basically gone bad the first time I switched it on. This happens quite often with old hardware, but it gone bad in a way that it suddenly draws 4 amp of power over the 12 volt line. This overloaded the power supply unit, breaking with it. So the power supply unit got repaired by one friend of the Robotron electronics forum, and we pointed out that the monitor might not be able to repair anyway. So I rebuilt an own monitor cable that I was able to connect to an Amiga monitor and as well to a LCD monitor via composite. After all, this project has been a success. Even though I'm left with a non-working monitor, the computer is working, and the only thing that is left for me to clean up is the keyboard. I hope you enjoyed having a look at this old computer tech from the Soviet Union. As you noticed, my channel has been quiet for some time. This is because RETR-O-MAT is a side project of mine. My main project is a modding project called Whispering Hills that reproduce Silent Hill in Fallout 4. I put a link to our website in the description below so you can have a look what it is all about. Till then, have a great day and I hope to see you soon.